Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Radio YesCymru with me, Sean Jobbins. We're on podcast and also on YouTube. And joining me today is Gwern Gwynfil, who's the Chief Exec of YesCymru. So welcome to the programme, Gwern.
Diolch, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's weird to speak to English. I think I've never spoken to you in English before, so apologies for any bungling of words in English. So you're the Chief Exec, started the job in August-ish 2022. Just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got into running for YesCymru's Chief Executive post.
So I don't want to bore the listeners with too much about myself, but I'm from Ceredigion, from Tregaron, the sprawling metropolis, which is Tregaron. Interestingly enough, I once made the effort to work out where the geographical centre of Wales was, and Tregaron is remarkably close. It's just slightly off-centre.
Okay, so if we build a Brasilia or a Cambria, it could be in Tregaron.
Well, absolutely. I like to think of it as the heart of Wales. So I like to think that I come from the heart of Wales. Yeah. And then deliberately after university, made a conscious choice before the internet was really around to try and make a life for myself and live in Ceredigion. And I'm not embarrassed to admit that it was incredibly challenging. There's very little opportunity at that time there. So I ended up doing a lot of work for the family business and doing other things as well. And that family business being the one established by my mother, Rhiannon, the quite famous jeweler, much more famous than I am. I'm sure a lot of your listeners will have heard of her. And if they haven't, then they should look up her work. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it is fantastic. I bought my wedding ring from Rhiannon. I'm divorced now, so I don't know if that says anything. It says nothing about Rhiannon's ability with jewelry. But I think that's an important facet of your makeup, Gwern, in that the obvious thing after university, you were at Oxford, would have gone to a job in London or whatever, or Cardiff, but you came back to Tregaron. There aren't many high-paying jobs in Tregaron, or even in Ceredigion. You ran a business there, employing people, which exports across the UK and across the world as well, which I think is an important point as well. And I think that's important to you, that we're trying to build the Welsh economy from the ground up, if you like, and keep jobs and meaningful, interesting jobs here in Wales. So, I mean,
yes, one of the things that is interesting in that context is how much things have changed during the course of my life. So, it was incredibly challenging when I came back. It was challenging for my mother when she decided to set up a business, and she was a woman as well, setting up a business in the early 70s. And I don't think is given enough credit really for being the innovator that she was.
Yeah, pioneer.
It was an incredibly bold thing to do.
And raise 4 kids. And 4 kids.
Yeah, and raise 4 kids as well. And we weren't easy as children. we weren't the easiest. But like you said, it was interesting that you said, I chose to stay there instead of going to London or Cardiff. And at the time, it was London. I mean, for people who had followed the path that I had through education, it was London. And that changed in the sort of 10, 20 years following that, and it became Cardiff.
Yeah.
And now it is most certainly Cardiff rather than London. And I did actually turn down a job offer in London at the time to go back, and then struggled to find anything to do in Ceredigion, to be honest.
Yeah.
I went back into education for a while just because there was nothing else to do.
So that, I don't know, it's partly tongue in cheek, but also quite serious. Then why go for the chief exec of YesCymru? Politics is an unforgiving profession. Business is difficult, and I've experienced that as well. But why make the jump to chair YesCymru, the first one, the first employee chief exec?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I was very conscious that before I even applied for the role, that if I did apply for the role, and if by any chance I was successful, which I honestly did not expect to be, then I would be sticking my head above the parapet, and I would be walking through a door which would shut behind me forever. There's no going back once you become the leader of a overtly political organization which has such a clear agenda and such a clear brief. It's not something you can try out. You can't test the waters for a few months and see if you like it. When you're in straight into the deep end of the pool. We're not dipping our toe in the water. So I gave it an awful lot of thought before I went into it. I mean, I've always been a firm believer that Wales could be so much more if it wasn't shackled in the way that it has been for centuries, not just recently, and particularly so now. I mean, in the last 20 years, as we've started to develop our own polity, as the Saesneg in Cardiff has matured and gone through its sort of toddler years and its teenage years, and is now a young adult, and is finding life as a young adult incredibly restrictive because its hands are tied by Westminster and by the constitutional, the lack of a constitution in the United Kingdom. So it was certainly something I felt passionate about, and everybody, I'm sure, had a great deal of time to reflect during the pandemic. I was no exception, even though I was quite busy during the pandemic, trying to keep the business going. And it does give you a time to reflect. And I'm sure some of my friends would tell you, I famously bang on about politics and relentlessly and incessantly and in great detail. And sometimes you have to just stop talking about it and do it. And it was that time for me. The time had come. It was time to stick my head above the parapet.
And it was also on a personal level. It is quite a jump because you got children, so quite young, 4 or 5, I forget. Sorry, Gwern.
Well, I have 5, but 4 of them are children. One is now a young adult. He's just turned 24, so he doesn't count. But the others are all in primary school or secondary.
So you got so that's a big issue as well if you're changing professions, as anyone knows. So you come into YesCymru, the first employed chief exec. What were your perceptions of the movement as a setup, and what did you think the movement needed to do quite soon, do you think?
Well, I mean, I'd followed the movement's growth, obviously, and I was still conscious that it was very young. It had gone through a dramatic spurt of growth and visibility, high visibility during the pandemic itself. And obviously, I was conscious that there had been some growing pains during that process. But I was an admirer of the brand, and I was an admirer of the simplicity and clarity of YesCymru's message. I think you had a hand in the brand yourself, Sean. So credit where credit's due. Credit where credit's due. But more than that, I felt that YesCymru, in terms of the independence debate in Wales, I felt that YesCymru, as it matured, and if it became the professional organisation that it could become, or the professionalized organisation, because it is a grassroots members organisation ultimately, it could have an impact, a powerful impact on the independence movement in Wales. In fact, the leading impact on the independence movement in Wales. And not only that, without some of the potential pitfalls that you might associate with the Scottish independence movement, which is too closely tied to an individual political party. And in that finds its greatest weakness, because if that political party falters, independence in Scotland will falter.
Right, this is an interesting point. Sorry, you carry on, Gwern. Sorry.
No, you asked the question.
Well, no, this is an interesting point, because I tend to think the Scots, and I think most Welsh people would obviously think, Welsh supporters of independence obviously think Scots are in a great situation. They got an SNP government which is avidly for independence. There's a Green Party also for independence. They're in government. There's a coalition thing up there. This is fantastic. But what you're now saying is you think there's a danger to that, and you think maybe that our situation isn't maybe as weak as maybe people like myself think, or what?
Yeah, I don't think our situation is weak at all. And I'm not saying that the Scottish situation is weak. I'm saying that they have a potential weakness.
Yes.
And that potential weakness is that their movement is tied to the Scottish National Party. So if you imagine a scenario where something happened, and a week is always a long time in politics, something happened to the Scottish National Party which undermined their dominance in Scotland, or caused a rift in the Scottish National Party, as so almost happened, in fact, with the creation of Alba, then suddenly the wind is taken out of the independence movement in Scotland. Now, I don't think that is going to in any way prevent Scotland from ultimately gaining its independence. The recent polling data there, in terms of the demographics, under 50s, there's 60% plus support for independence. So it is a matter of time for Scotland. But there is definitely a scenario where it is longer than it should be because of that inherent weakness in their independence model. And Wales hasn't copied that. because Wales has an umbrella movement, if that umbrella movement can be harnessed, if the potential of that umbrella movement can be seen by all the supporters of independence in Wales, and part of our role is to make sure that they can see that potential. And if everybody can then get behind YesCymru as that leading, that flag carrying movement for independence, whilst also being members of their other independence movements, their respective independence goals, which will have their own agendas, but always focused on independence through YesCymru, then suddenly you have a driving force which is impervious to the bumps in the road that other individual organizations may come across. And it's got fantastic potential. And I can even see a scenario, and I know you won't, you may find this amusing,
yeah.
But I can even see a scenario where Wales could leapfrog Scotland and get there first.
I don't think that would ever happen. I mean, I'm interested to hear your reasoning, and I'll give you my reasoning, but I think that's very wishful thinking, because we need just the mechanism. You need to do the constitutional stuff for having a vote, and need to get enough party in power to precipitate that vote and everything. So I mean, I would love to.
Yes. No, you don't need to get a party in power. You need to get a majority of Senedd members who are in favour of independence. Yeah,
well, I don't think the Labour Party, Welsh Labour, ever support independence, except in the sort of Karl I last days of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, so October 1918, where he's desperate. All of a sudden, the Triple Crown for the Slavs, including the Hungarians, is possible. And yes, the Slovenes can reunite their lands, and all this is possible in the last days. And he's basically desperate to keep things together.
Okay, so this is really interesting, because our last polling data, the last set of YesCymru polling data, showed 40% of 2019 Labour voters in Wales were in favour of independence.
All right, you know that.
So if you have 2 in 5 of your voter base in favour of independence, and you've got a fantastic compromise going at the moment, which is devolution max. This is the Labour Party's fantastic compromise. It papers over the cracks, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it keeps the Labour Party independence camp and the Labour Party unionist camp just about
but
on
it's totally
board.
No, it's not worth the paper written on, because they're still against devolution of justice and policing.
So the devolution of justice and policing, this is an excellent example of those cracks. The Labour Party in Wales is famously good at not allowing internal ructions to surface, and that one has surfaced, because Welsh Labour's policy is the devolution of justice and policing, and yet the Welsh Labour deputy leader, who happens to be an MP in Westminster, very publicly came out against her own party's policy in Wales. And it is for us to put pressure on Labour around these cracks internally. And I'm not expecting the Labour Party in Wales to come out in favour of independence. But if we can put enough pressure on the Labour Party in Wales to allow their members to come out in favour of independence, should they wish to, so in effect to make it an open question for the Labour Party or the Labour movement in Wales, rather than try and have this constant compromise and paper over the cracks, then we have the opportunity to increase the number of Senedd members who will publicly back independence.
I think that's a big risk, and I'll tell you, not because I'm not intending against it, not either, but I can understand that someone comes maybe from a Labour background and they feel a lot of attachment and affinity to that. I think if you have Welsh Labour MP, Labour Party in itself is a British institution, and it's a very strong British nationalist institution, in that the Labour Party is the embodiment of that Britishness. And I can see Chris Bright never, ever voting for independence or allowing it to happen. And you have to respect Brian to the other MPs who are like that, and most of them are, because that's how they feel. They feel the same way about the UK as I do about Welsh independence. And the idea that they would somehow decide, oh, okay, we it's sort of 1919 Belarus votes for independence type of scenario, 1991 scenario. I don't know. I think this is the problem I have. I don't. You have to have some steps have to be taken for that vote to happen. So I can see maybe a vote, say, in the Senedd for independence. I think that would only happen because Plaid Cymru is taking off seats from the Labour Party. So I cannot see it happening of itself from the Labour Party. But I don't see a lot of people involved in it would ever allow that to happen because they are against it. That's something
I am going to disagree with you.
Right.
I am going to disagree. I'm going to disagree with you for a few reasons. I know they're not a force in Wales anymore, but I can see the Liberals in the Saesneg being in favour of independence or allowing their members to be in favour of independence at the moment. But I fully expect them. I mean, it's not that challenging for them to increase their number from one to more.
And I don't belittle that, but just to say it.
There is only one at the moment, and at the moment, Liberal Democrat support in Wales is at such a low ebb that there wasn't a significant enough sample to give me a data result in the last polling that we did for the Lib Dems, which is a real indicator of how low support has slumped for the Lib Dems. But when you're down at the bottom, there is only one way to go. So I fully expect the Liberals to do better as time goes by. Yeah. But for the Labour Party, I think what you've highlighted is exactly the problem for the Labour movement. They have a British Labour movement now, which has Welsh MPs in London, and they have a Welsh Labour movement, which has established that clear red water between London and Welsh Labour, and that is causing a lot of tension for them internally. Not least of which highlighted by that policing and justice issue we've already discussed. And I think that's going to be a problem. And that's not a problem for us in the independence movement. That is a problem for the Labour movement in Wales. And if we continue to put pressure on them, it becomes a bigger and bigger problem for them.
Yeah.
And if we can become, and as you know, it's one of the things that I'm passionate about. If YesCymru can become the largest political movement in Wales, the pressure on Welsh Labour will be immense. For 100 years, they have been the largest political group by membership in Wales without fail. And that hegemony has never been challenged. But if we can get everybody who supports independence in Wales behind YesCymru, joining YesCymru, then suddenly we have a chance of getting to that 25,000 membership, which makes us the largest political grouping in Wales. And just by doing that, if we do nothing else, and we are going to do a lot more, I promise you, but if we did nothing else, that in itself would change the nature of the debate in Wales forever. Independence would be on the agenda on a daily basis. There'd be no question of the Today programme holding their radio programme in Wales, as they did today, this morning, and not having someone on that programme discussing Welsh independence. And that someone would most likely be from YesCymru. It would be a gravitational shift in politics in Wales.
So maybe to just wrap up this part, I mean, the irony of seeing the Labour Party move more toward independence would only happen, I think, or would most likely happen if they lose seats to Plaid Cymru. So the irony, to some extent, if Labour people want Labour to be more independence-minded, they almost need to be voting Plaid, even if just tactically, to make that shift to get, because nothing. Democracy is very similar in one way to capitalism. It works by market forces. So if you're losing votes, you change. Same as any business does. And that's the one thing which will make the Labour Party change, is if they see votes seeping away because they're not moving basically where they're based. And I think the polling there is interesting and very heartening and better than I expected, to be honest with you. So I think the shift is happening on the grassroots. And there is tension then between essentially Drakeford's Labour Party. What happens after Drakeford's another question, of course. And Westminster, who are looking for their ministerial jobs and little red boxes and ministerial cars. And that's a big thing. So
I agree with you on that last point, I have to say, because and pressure comes from more than one direction, doesn't it? So if Plaid and the Greens can apply pressure, well, if Plaid, the Greens, anybody else who's openly in favour of independence, and if at the same time we as an independence movement are growing, and like you say, self-interest motivates a lot of politicians, and if they can see that the independence movement is growing, and then there is definitely some self-interest.
But it's not happening in
Scotland.
But it's not happening in Scotland. So the Labour Party is still against independence in Scotland. Maybe by now, that's what they believe in. So I think you have to respect that they don't believe in independent Scotland. I disagree with that, but that's a legitimate point of view and moral point of view to take. But they haven't gone for independence. So, I mean, this again, I think is part of the the danger of thinking maybe things would change with Labour. We're in Scotland where actually independence is now the majority view for the last few years. They still haven't moved with that.
They haven't. I mean, they've softened their position a little, I think, and they haven't moved though because they have some big beasts who are very Scottish, but who are also very London-based and have quite firm control over the Labour Party in Scotland. But I do wonder if historically, or even in retrospect right now, as they look back, they consider whether they should have moved far faster, far closer to independence, and perhaps that would have prevented them hemorrhaging quite as much support as they did to the SNP quite as quickly. And obviously, Welsh Labour might learn lessons from that.
Yes, and maybe had they been more in devolution back in the beginning years of this century, maybe things would have been different. I mean, I think
this feels like a topical politics seminar.
Yes.
Sean. We need to stop this. We need to move on and talk about something else.
Yes, we'll talk about YesCymru now. So I mean, obviously, I think we both agreed. YesCymru is a mass movement. It has to be a mass. That's my view. I think we'd all agree. So I mean, and Wales needs a mass movement, or one mass movement for independence, which is non-party political. I think parties are other things as well, because the mass movement means you have feet on the ground. You have the next door neighbours, remember, YesCymru, and when people see the Daily Mail that people want independence, they all kind of bad, naughty things, and say, well, David next door, he looks a nice chap, and he's in YesCymru. I think just having that on a personal level, and people seeing pictures of people they know, but also it's the fighting fund, is the money for making the videos and making the stuff.
I think that point about the local membership is incredibly key, and it's incredibly key in terms of the vision that myself and the board are trying to put in place and the way we're trying to develop the organisation. Right. I mean, it's a huge thing. Independence, it's a huge thing. After 700 years of not being independent, independence is a big thing. It's a big deal, and it's really important that there are local people talking to their own community, so that communities are being spoken to in their own voice by people within their community who understand them and who have come to independence themselves and can share with their neighbours and friends and family and community and fellow co-workers how their own journey to independence, and not drag other people into the independence debate, merely get them to interrogate their own beliefs so that they find their own way to independence. I think that's absolutely key. And a core part of our responsibility, and YesCymru centrally, is to build the infrastructure across the organisation so that we have that network, a pan-Wales network of groups and members who have the skill sets and the confidence to go out and talk to their communities, but also have networked with everybody else in Wales, all the other groups, so that we're sharing best practice, we're sharing information, we're sharing commonly asked questions, we're sharing events and activities that are just fun to do, and we're getting to know each other. It's key to what we're trying to do.
So how was YesCymru? How was YesCymru under your sort of leadership? See, trying to build that movement then to make that happen. All these wonderful things. What's the main big building blocks for YesCymru now, do you think?
Well, we had some boring and tedious stuff to do in terms of our in terms of our software package. And one of the very first things that I did was set up our digital development group, appoint a lead director to it, and get on with that work. Right. And some of that has been done, and there's an awful lot more to do, but it's happening, and we're making progress. So
what does that mean? What does that mean to
in terms of the groups? What it means is that we're almost finished now with allocating a ward to every single area in Wales, and then each ward would be allocated to a group. So let's say that Mr. Jobbins has been listening to this podcast and is fired up by Sean's discussion and wants to join today. When you join, you will then be allocated a ward, and there will be a group to whom that ward is allocated. And I think we're up to about 80 or 90% of that work is done.
And
not all of those groups exist yet.
Right. Okay.
So not all of those groups exist yet, but we are in process, and we're working very hard to re-establish groups where they've lapsed, to create new groups where there are gaps. And we're building that up towards a conference, our first annual conference in June, 10th and 11th of June in Aberystwyth, where We will try and get 400. I think we're only allowed 400. That's 350 to 400. But in particular, a handful from each group to come down, to meet each other, to be given some guidance on how to use Nation Builder, how to communicate with people in their own area, how to interact on social media, all of these things, so that they can leave with more confidence and develop their skills and be more active and take that information back to their local groups. And in time, we will have a robust and resilient pan-Wales network, which is upon which we can build all of our campaigns. And that's key.
It is. And what to expect the local group, say someone is interesting in starting a local group, or their local group has gone a bit quiet recently because we are dependent on volunteers. What do you expect the local group to do, or what do you what do you want them to do, and how do you make sure they actually do it? Because you're not playing.
So if the group is defunct and someone wants to create one, get in touch and we will help you. Okay. That's what we're here for. We're here to help. And in time, what we want to do is make sure that groups aren't necessarily entirely reliant on one person to drive them all the time, so that they become cooperative, they become resilient and strong. And there are ways to do that. So we'll try and ask everybody to double up on all roles within the group. So there's always someone shadowing, whether it be posting on social media or organizing events, whatever aspect of responsibility they've taken on. And over time, as that confidence develops, we'll ask them to do more, but we'll also suggest that they create events of their own on their own accord. And if something works well, to then share it with other groups. Okay. And we'll also ask groups to help each other. So if you have a group, if Pantabarlat, if YesCymru Pantabarlat has a group which is struggling for numbers for something, we will ask YesCymru Gwynfil to come across and help. Right. And in time, I don't think we'll need to ask, because they will have created those connections, and they will start to ask each other and work together cooperatively. So it's from the bottom up, from the top down, and creating a team. Yeah, and creating a broad movement. So I mean, I think some people are thinking, okay, that's all the local groups are doing is banners on bridges. It's getting a bit boring now. We can't do anything better. Paraphrasing here. So what kind of thing would you like to see, or do you expect groups to make? I know in Aberystwyth, delivering a newspaper was effective, is get the message out, it's fairly easy, you stick a podcast or some music on, some exercise. We've done some collecting stuff for the food bank and litter picking, and we try to hold some events. We need to do more of that. But what do groups need to be doing, do you think, or more of? That's exactly what they need to be doing. And what about the aspiration, the banners on bridges? Is there any use? I think it's actually quite effective, but not everyone is out there. So I like banners on bridges. Yeah, and me. Because, but we do need to do a lot more than banners on bridges, because banners on bridges makes us such an easy target. The Daily Mail would just describe us as flag-waving nashies, wouldn't they? Because of the banners on bridges. But banners on bridges is great. And I think we should definitely keep doing banners on bridges. The food banks, the litter picking, absolutely we should keep doing those, although not necessarily for political capital, just because we are community groups as well, and we should be doing them. I mean, if groups are willing to do so, they should go along to their local farmers market. We'll pay for the table for them, £10, and just stand there, talk to people as they walk past, have a chat about independence, give away some free badges like this one. Give people some badges if they want them. Talk about independence more than anything else. Have some more relaxed and informal meetings rather than always having formal meetings. A pub quiz, just meet for a little debate in the local pub or in a local restaurant. We'll actually be asking the groups in the next week now to try and arrange something for St. David's Day on a small level. I can't tell you what that's about yet, because it's going to be out in the next newsletter or the one afterwards. So make sure if you're listening and you haven't read it, make sure you do read those. and then if they organize an event, anything, and it works well, that they feed that back to us so that we can share that with other groups, and perhaps those other groups can also organize similar events. So what about social media? Sorry, carry on. That's okay. So I mean, there's stuff there for the local groups to do, which
I would hope YesCymru would back up, and I think people also need to be told sometimes what to do, because it can be a very boring and tedious discussion where people discussing what to do and then it actually happens. I think having a calendar of events for local groups is very handy, and it sort of gives people an idea.
Yeah, definitely, and that's where having other groups do things and share it as well is a great idea, because I mean, I think Bala a few years ago did a car washing thing, so they did a free car wash, and they washed your car for free, but in return you had to have a YesCymru sticker on the back.
Right.
So they stickered about 100 cars. And it was the summer, and it was a great event for them. Geraint told me about it. It was obviously lots of fun.
Yeah.
And they had a lot of discussions with those people in those cars about independence. And I think that's what it boils down to, is those discussions. So many people in Wales have not even thought about it. And for me, I mean, I would be happy if everyone in Wales was just talking about independence.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in favor of independence, but talking about it.
Yeah.
And questioning interrogating their own beliefs, coming to their own conclusions, and really thinking hard about it. I mean, that's part of the battle for us, isn't it? Is to get people to think and talk about independence.
I mean, moving on to the social media side of things, because this is such an important part of YesCymru. It's very important during, obviously, the COVID period. And it costs, well, a lot of it's for free if you can get people to do stuff, but to get good quality stuff, you need to also be investing in it. So, I mean, what are the plans for that? Because this is such a big issue, and we know we're against very powerful opposition.
It's interesting that you raise this point. It's very high on the current priority list. Actually, is creating is content creation. So finding, and if there are any listeners, any members and listeners, supporters now who are hearing this and would like to contribute towards content creation, particularly short form video content, but also graphic design and anything useful, in fact, then please get in touch with us and raise your hand, and we will bring you together with others who want to do the same, because it is important that we have a constant flow of content. And that is part of the problem with the modern internet and social media, is it's a ravenous beast that consumes content relentlessly and has to be fed relentlessly. And some of them will be incredibly effective, and other things that you might think will be effective won't be effective. So you just have to keep plugging away at it. And we're starting to get a little bit more shape on it centrally. We've launched the blog, the written blog on the site. We're reproducing all our press releases. We try and do something on a weekly basis, and that goes into the latest page, so there's a regular refresh of the feed. We'll add more and more things ourselves, but even better if we can do that across platforms, and start to have members who aren't necessarily doing YesCymru official content, but are doing pro-indie content and putting it on TikTok and on channels where we wouldn't be allowed to go anyway. I think TikTok are quite clear that political content, named political content, is not allowed. So if you're a political party or someone like YesCymru, they won't let you have your own channel.
Say someone was up to doing some personal content, which maybe wouldn't always be about politics independence. Would they be able maybe to get in touch with you and you maybe give them a boost or something on your social media, something that help them out, by raising their profile or something, or working out in another way, something, or even paying some money? I don't know.
I mean, if it's pro-indie, then they should tag YesCymru. And absolutely. I mean, if it's pro-indie, it's pro-indie. I will follow anyone. I mean, I know Twitter is having some issues at the moment. But if I see Annibyniaeth or independence, or Gwern Gwynfil, or anything that suggests someone is pro-indie in their bio or in a tweet, then I automatically follow them.
And I think that's actually quite an important lesson, I think, to the movement in general. There are going to be disagreements, sometimes very heated, but we also need to be sharing stuff as well. We need to and get it, and for local groups as well, to be sharing stuff on Twitter and on Facebook, so we get the message out. I think there's some issues now with Twitter. I'm using a lot more of Instagram now. I find it more interesting. But I mean, getting that social media stuff out, and that costs money, and then this is where the importance of having membership and the income from that and getting stuff done is so important.
Yeah, absolutely, and I mean, resources are a problem. I mean, we would love to be able to, as an organization, to commission all sorts of relevant research into things that are important to the indie movement and things that help us build the case for indie, you know, in terms of the mind, because social media really most of the time is going to be appealing to the heart.
Yeah.
And I think in general, there's probably a 20-80 split, mind and heart. But both are important, and both are equally important, even if the split isn't necessarily equal. So we would love to be able to do that, but you know, we just have to accept that we're not going to be able to match the deep pockets of those who are likely to be arrayed against independence as a movement. You know, there's an entrenched institution that's been there for centuries.
But there's institutional knowledge and memory there of how to swindle, con, and bribe and bully people.
You're even more cynical than I am, Sean. You're even more cynical than me.
I mean, ideally, I would like to see something like the Lincoln Project for independence, that kind of quality of content which they have in the USA against Trump, but battling for independence. They cost a lot of money to do very good 30-second or 50-second items.
So I think one of the things that is good, I mean, we have an awful lot of creative talent in Wales, and an awful lot of the creative talent in Wales are members or supporters of independence. But even if they are willing to give their time for free, which we are incredibly grateful for, there is still for high quality professional short or long form video content, there are costs involved. You're absolutely right. And I mean, we will get there, and yes, it does come back to membership. You know, the more members we have, the more resources, the more financial resources we have, but also the more human resources we have. So it becomes a virtuous circle, and we can keep doing more and more. And obviously, the more we do, the more visible we become, and the more support we will engender, and the more we can do. But it's just it's a question of being patient, and making those small steps forwards. But I am conscious as well that and I'm not a very patient person either, but I'm conscious that things could move very, very quickly.
Yes.
So although we had that long conversation about, you know, the possibilities for Scotland, it is also a possibility that Scotland could leave incredibly quickly and incredibly soon. And then that suddenly throws the spotlight on Wales. And you might even get a scenario where a particularly canny unionist politician decides to give Wales a referendum because they feel confident that the Indie campaign will lose. And they can entrench the current situation for another quarter of a century. Even though I suspect that most realists, even in the unionist camp, are conscious now that the union is over. You know, there's a sort of there's a historical defining point in the death of the Queen. Northern Ireland.
There's like 2 years, I think. I think the next 2 years are crucial. I think there's a generation thing that you said there. The Queen has passed. There'll be the coronation. I don't think the same feeling for Prince Charles. Things are going to kick off in Scotland. You know, there is going to be a vote for independence sometime in Ireland as well.
Well, I mean, it's inevitable that Ireland will reunify. I mean, it's hard written into the Good Friday Agreement. And one of the things that's interesting about that, I feel politically, we're going back to a political seminar again, but one of the things that's interesting about that politically is how relaxed the Irish and the Northern and politicians in Northern Ireland as well, who are in favour of reunification. They just seem incredibly relaxed about it.
Well,
because they know it's going to happen.
Yes, there's no point kicking up storm. But what's also interesting in Ireland, you're listening to people like David McWilliams, who's an Irish economist. I think his grandfather was in IRIC, so the Royal Irish Constabulary. So not a Sinn Féiner at all, but he's sort of making a case now for independence and reunification, rather. I think when that sort of things happen, when those kind of people are making a case for reunification or discussing quite seriously, I think things are going to move quite quickly. But there's no big rush, you know, for Ireland. I think it's just about what's 5 years or 10 years. I think there's a position there, from what I can gather, which does lead us to the question about the positioning of YesCymru. I mean, I think remember talking to someone years ago when we started off with YesCymru, and he made the point that the independence movement really raised traction during the referendum in Scotland, when people started to feel it actually impacted with their own personal economy. They could afford to pay for stuff, or they couldn't afford to pay for stuff, or they weren't getting a decent pension or whatever. And I think that is less, maybe, broad independence movement. How they define that is then the crucial thing. But how does YesCymru position itself? So I mean, the things like banners and bridges, I think, are important, because I think it's visual, it's fun, it's easy. It's people who don't like canvassing or not too sure of it, they're playing a part, which is important, I think, for the movement. But how do we get from maybe people being fairly supportive but to being for independence? How does YesCymru position itself there? How do you think the independence will actually happen? What will be the forces combining the cultural, the community, the social forces combining to make independence happening, do you think? So it's a big question.
I mean, it is an important question in terms of positioning. And you talk about people suddenly engaging because they can perceive a material impact on their lives. That is happening now. It is clear that the United Kingdom and Great Britain is no longer a growing, vibrant economy with a dominant position in the world. It is exactly the opposite. It is an empire in decline, coming to the end of its years. Every empire, there's a rise and fall, and this one is clearly at the end of that cycle. And over time, we're becoming relatively less wealthy, as across the United Kingdom. But in Wales, we've already been the poorest part of that collection of nations for over 50 years. And I think part of the argument for us is not so much this is having a material impact on you now, but this has had a material impact on your lives for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
And staying with the status quo will not change that. We're never going to stop being the poorest part of the union whilst the union exists, because we cannot break free from the things that are keeping us in poverty. And it's not just poverty, it's not just poverty of wealth, it's poverty of opportunity. And for me, one of the driving forces, and I'm talking for me personally now, as opposed to necessarily for me as the chief exec of YesCymru, but for me, the relentlessly negative and poor statistics for child poverty in Wales are an enormous driver for me. It makes me physically angry when I think about it. At the moment, we probably have 1 in 5 children in Wales in absolute poverty. And probably half the children by now in Wales in relative poverty. Now, relative poverty is a moving target, because it's 60% of median income. But absolute poverty was fixed in 2011. Inflation should have taken children out of absolute poverty. And yet, by April, there will probably be 40,000 more children in Wales in absolute poverty than there were before. And that's horrendous. That's just a financial measure. If you add in the poverty of opportunity for those same children, we are doing an immense disservice to our own children unless we seize every opportunity to gain independence so that we can give them better opportunities and work against that level of poverty. So I give you a little insight there into my own driving forces.
No,
sorry, I didn't really answer the question, Sean.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, it's also, I think, it's absolute disgrace, isn't it? And it's to do. There's a lot of issues to be discussed, but it is in the main, it's a question of priority. So who do tax and how, and how those people paid, and how is it, and how is
so the tax question. So we were talking briefly about, if we had the funds to do a piece of research. That is actually a piece of research we would love to commission on if you were looking at Wales as an entity, as an unit, how would you construct the taxation policy? And you know that it would not be the same as the current UK taxation policy, because it's not really fit for purpose for the size, shape, and nature of the economy in Wales. So doing that, so that you'd have some idea of the options in terms of taxation systems in an independent Wales would be a fantastic piece of research for us as an organisation to be able to commission. But you know, one, you need to find someone to commission it from, and two, you need a 5-figure sum really to fund the master's student or the PhD student who's going to do it, or the research associate who's going to do it, plus whatever funds, additional funds are needed. And unfortunately, we're not quite there yet. You know, we're not quite there.
And also, you'd almost want a couple of different options for taxation, isn't it? So you could.
Yes.
So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because that's also the reality of it. And also part of the reason we need independence is no point complaining that all the kids are going to London to work when there are actually jobs there, because that's the head of the nation state, isn't it? So if Wales was independent, many of those jobs would be in Wales, and hopefully not just in Cardiff, but devolved around Wales as well. So there's good quality jobs which already have to be done in any case. They're now done in London, not back home in Aberystwyth or Cardiff or whatever, or Bangor. And that's another obvious independence case for them. Why people still believe they want to get powers in London, because power in London means jobs in London, and it means jobs not in Wales. And that's another obvious case for independence. So I mean, this is the big thing about how we get the argument over. So we discussed doing it, you know, if you like, the analog way. People, local groups. Hopefully, there's going to be another YesCymru newspaper, which I think is a very effective tool. You talked in the Welsh version discussion we've had that local groups going to be out leafleting during the international matches.
No. So a number of groups have come together. They'll be doing that now in the series of internationals that are coming up. I think there's 2 home games in February, aren't there?
Yeah.
So they'll be standing on train stations, leafleting, and hopefully here on the main plaza as well. And because it'll be numerous groups all doing it at the same time, you know, it shows it's a great working example of the groups coming together and cooperating.
And make sure it's visible with some big YesCymru flags, so people at least know YesCymru is there as well. Then you obviously discussed the social media, and then we've discussed into like the need for a big fat YesCymru movement, so we can get stuff like in the research done, which backs up people's concerns, but also paints an exciting picture of Wales, which can be, rather than part of this rotting corpse of the UK state.
The rotting corpse of the. I like it. I like it. Very graphic.
You can almost smell the decomposition, can't you? It's absolutely disgusting.
I mean, I do see part of the role for YesCymru is to shift the political dial by being as big as it possibly can, and you know, that putting that weight on the political balance in itself has an impact. I mean, it really does focus minds, doesn't it? Yeah. So we have, you know, although on the surface, the YesCymru strategic goal seems very simple, independence for Wales. You know, the approach to that has to be, you know, multi-channel, and you know, it's just, you know, we have to do everything we can in every sphere that we can, and in every aspect that we can, all of the time, and cumulatively and relentlessly, because as soon as we take our foot off the pedal, we will go back very quickly.
Yes, and it's the same as, well, you know, if you're running a business, if you're not going forward, you are going back because you're competitors. And in our field, it's competition of ideas, isn't it? And competition of emotion, which can take over. And that's why Britishness has been so powerful in the past, because there hasn't been other people making a case for independence. You know, we were actually left the field totally.
And we have to make that case. You know, it has to be a case based on hope and aspiration as well.
Well,
you know,
this is the question I was going to raise with you earlier. Sorry, I mean, and this is maybe the danger. You know, if we rightly say point out the poverty of our communities, and it's generational now with some places. Only in many places, like in Ceredigion itself, as you would know, masked by richer people able to buy properties. So there's a class of people, nothing wrong with them, you know, but they can support local business through that. Essentially, the poverty is sort of generational. But if we highlight that, then independence is aspirational as well. I mean, if people hear the message from YesCymru and others that Wales is poor, our kids are poor, our community is poor, they can say, well, Wales can't afford independence. So how do we get over that, or how do we use that? So people, if they're hearing the message that
Yeah.
Wales is poor, that they don't think then, oh, but we're obviously too poor to be independent then.
I mean, the obvious answer and the glib answer is Wales can't afford not to be independent.
But that's true.
Because you know we've been poor for 50 years and more,
Yeah.
and we'll just continue to be poor. So
Yeah.
so you know, and there's a sort of we have nothing to lose there argument. But I think it's more than that. I think in a sense, independence now is more realistic than it has been for the last 50 years as well, and in particular because of this, because of this and what the digital age has brought. What we're doing now, we couldn't do this 20 years ago. It would have been a chore. I would have had to come to meet you. We would have had to set up video cameras and recording equipment, and then who knows how we would have got it out onto into the public domain. Whereas now it's simple. We record it, it's uploaded, and it's out there. That gives us access not just to everybody else in Wales, but globally. So, and small nations, just like a small company, can be incredibly nimble and reactive. And in terms of my own perceptions of how it would succeed, and obviously you can never second guess what will happen, but Wales could conceivably focus on some quite specific niches in the global marketplace in terms of expertise, skill sets, and impact, and invest in those specifically over 10, 20, 30, 40 years and become a global leader. And once you've established that suddenly you have a great deal of income and economic vibrancy. And it can be done. There are other small countries that have done it. And there are some that haven't, and a lot of those nations did not have what Wales has to offer.
Well, this is the travesty of the situation. That we are poor people, but the country's rich. We have some core things which make us. They're not transportable. They can't be shipped over to the Cayman Islands or hidden under some taxing. We have renewable energy. We have a pretty small population for a fairly large landmass in terms of European size. And as you can say, we could be honing in on some very specific niche markets, which for a big company, for a big country wouldn't make much difference. But for a small country with Wales, makes a big difference to your balance of payments because you're getting millions of pounds from that particular thing. And that's the kind of thing we could be doing. And let's say being nimble, and we're now seeing former Soviet countries like Estonia starting to overtake us in things like GDP, and that just says, and Slovenia as well, that says a lot.
My favorite example for the nimbleness of small countries is Iceland after the financial crash, because Iceland was the most powerfully impacted by the financial crash.
And this was held up by the Labour Party and Gordon Brown as a reason for not having independence, of course.
And they were wiped out. The whole of Iceland, but Iceland just pressed the reset button, and 3 years later, Iceland was not only recovered, but was actually in a better place than it had been prior to that financial crash. 3 years, whereas the UK is still feeling some of the after effects.
And a lot of bankers, of course, that crashed Iceland now reside in London, which tells you a lot. The same with Ireland as well. Same situation in Ireland. Still problems in Ireland, you can argue, but they reset and they were able to do it, being nimble and also using their own skills. And Ireland is literally.
We did talk about the poverty in Wales, but and the sort of fixed natural resources that we have, which give us a great deal of wealth. But I think what is often overlooked is how wealthy we are in terms of human resources. I mean, although the demographics in Wales are a little bit skewed, and if you look at the census figure, that is often because of the number of older people who have moved into Wales rather than the actual population of people born in Wales. I think the figures for Ceredigion recently suggest that in the older population in Ceredigion, they're overwhelmingly people who have moved into Ceredigion, and obviously they don't contribute in the same way. But setting that aside, we still have a wealth of human resources, and we have a multilingual population, which in itself is a bonus. Everybody in Wales speaks English, which is a language spoken by over 1 billion people in the world, and which is the language of commerce internationally. So we have these advantages. We don't have to learn to speak that language to communicate and interact and take part in international trade. we're in a fantastic location. You know, we're on the same timeline as London, the financial capital of the world. You know, we have a great climate. You know, we have so many things going for us.
Yeah,
we do have a great climate.
Yeah, I'm not too sure that.
We do have a great
but
climate.
there's no earthquakes like in Iceland.
You know, so we have a lot of things in our favor and a lot of strengths, and we forget, you know, because, and again, it goes back to this narrative. We've been given this narrative of weakness constantly and relentlessly, and we forget that at its core in Wales, you know, we are strong. At the heart of Wales is a dragon.
Yeah.
You know, and we forget that. We forget that.
Yes, and countries much smaller than us and in much worse positions than us have made a success of it. So if you think of all these small European countries, most of them have gained independence during either a period of war, which has continued to a period of civil war, which is the situation in Ireland and in all Eastern Europe, or then the later period, an absolute collapse of a whole economic system, which is the Soviet Union. So Wales will be becoming independent, I think, partly because of the economic failure of the UK project, and people will see that, and they don't think that project gives them the life they want themselves and their children to have. But it will be nothing to compare with the collapse of the Soviet Union or Europe following the First World War, where you also had the Spanish flu raging and a huge amount of very interesting civil wars going on in places. So we're going to be gaining independence in a much more benign climate than pretty well every other country has ever done, you know, with the exception of Scotland, in the last 150 years.
Yeah, no, I agree. Opportunity beckons, Sean. Independence now.
Well, it does. It is a no-brainer. But I think we as a nation also have to... There is a trick, isn't it, between saying that we're in a situation we are at now because of the mismanagement of the UK state and the actual makeup of the UK state is that it's been unable to deal with that. But also people then feeling that Wales is too poor. And I think we don't talk ourselves into poverty. We need to be having an aspirational and an optimistic message. And I think that's the important part. And that's where the people in YesCymru is so important, I think.
Yeah. And you know, coming back to the people, just I think to close, I mean, we as a movement are only going to be as successful and capable and impactful as the collective efforts of all of our members.
Yes, and that's why the movement needs to have a big, broad membership to support this. So, I mean, I know you're talking in the Melyn Drafod, which is new independence think tank, Melyn Drafod conference in the Gwern Gwynfil Hall in Swansea, which is a fantastic hall. That's been sold out, which is good news. And it's good to see YesCymru contributing, supporting that, and you taking part. So I think your message earlier was that, you know, if you're members of other groups, you'll join YesCymru too, because we need to have this big, and I say, this is something Wales has, which Scotland does, which is non-party political movement for independence. So people can be a part of this, continue membership of other groups or parties. But we need to have this mass movement, I think, but partly for the financial, but more importantly, but just the human capital of people getting together, doing stuff together. And we can only win, as the Baltic nations showed in 1991, through having a mass public movement for independence. We can't do it any other way.
Yeah, and visibility, a mass public, visible, highly visible movement.
Yeah, that happened.
I agree.
Gwern Gwynfil, thanks for your time talking to Radio YesCymru. We're now, as you know, on YouTube and on podcast. Please follow us. It'd be good, maybe we can catch up in a year so time to see how things are happening. But on the horizon for YesCymru is, well, you're taking part in the Melyn Drafod discussion on 28th of January in Swansea. There's going to be an independence march sometime in the spring, summer. We're looking forward to that. The conference
April.
on 10th.
It'll be end of April.
End of April. Ooh,
April.
Right,
Swansea. Swansea in April. April in Swansea.
So it's going to be before the crowning of Prince Charles then?
Who's Charles? Who's Prince Charles?
Well, I think I'll be taking a holiday when doing that. I'll be avoiding that. Prince Charles.
And then you're right. Then the conference on the 11th and 12th, 10th and 11th. Sorry,
that's it in numbers. But the message is, you know, if you get involved locally or get stuff on social media, share stuff, like stuff. And if you have any ideas or any groups that want to know any stuff, get in touch with Gwern and the crew. Essentially, they're more than happy to help you out. Gwern, thanks for your time. I appreciate that. And until next time we'll speak, take
Ie,
care.
tan y tro nesa. Diolch o galon, Siôn.
Wyt ti,
Diolch o galon.
la.